The Twin City tussle happened tonight. At least that's what I'm calling it. Maybe that can stick. I don't know. But we saw absolutely horrid officiating. And I wanted to go in tonight talking about a lot of different things. As you can see, we have a new agenda on that side right next to Sean. But we have to talk about the fight that broke out. Ron Holland ejected. Isaiah Stewart ejected. Marcus Sasser ejected. Plenty more. JB Bickerstaff. Naz Reid. Dante DiVincenzo. Enough of me talking right now. Sean Murphy, what's up, man? We just witnessed a horrendous game. We're getting to that grind of the season where every win matters. Cade's been out. We're going to be talking about his injury a little bit more, getting your input, your advice on that one. But, Sean, what's going on, man? How you doing? How you feeling?
Ledgy, it's good to see you, my guy. I was doing really well going into tonight. The first quarter was a very entertaining watch. The second quarter leading up to that tussle was very entertaining as well. Not gonna lie, in the moment, the whole altercation, very fun to watch. Those like you're lying to yourself if you don't enjoy watching those, especially as someone that's grown up in the Pistons basketball culture. That's like our lifeblood. So those are the types of incidents that are really enjoyable to watch. But then to see the fallout specifically from the officiating from both the in-arena crew and from the virtual crew in the league offices, as well as just how the Timberwolves responded, how everything else played out. That was a pretty infuriating one, and I can pretty confidently say between David Guthrie, Marat Kogut, Jason Goldenberg, the trio that officiated tonight's game, that was the most poorly handled and officiated game of the NBA season. I do not think it is close. I think if any players face any suspensions for this, I think those refs should face suspensions as well, because I thought they completely let this one go. The judgment in the way that it was handled from there on out was just poor. And it's one of those things where we'll get into the details and all of it, but anytime you have a referee decide a outcome of a game for any reason, but especially for a reason where Pistons players are, let's be real, they went in and they defended their guy. Because what are you going to do? Allow your 19-year-old rookie to be in the middle of 2 or 3 Timberwolves players and they just get to beat the living out of him because, oh, well, that's rough. I mean, he's just in that circumstance. You're not allowed to go in and defend your guy. It's laughable. It's pitiful. It's stupid.
Yeah, you see Isaiah Stewart, Marcus Sasser, they're in there pulling, trying to get people off of Ron Holland.
Well, Isaiah Stewart might have been trying to pull a head off of a body, but I mean, he was like guys like Marcus Sasser, guys like JB Bickerstaff. From our angle, it looked like they were trying to de-escalate things. I think JB was defending his guy too and was chirping with coaches and things like that. But just the way that this was called, and I texted you this during the game too. There's nothing more infuriating in sports than the reality that it's never the guy who instigates that gets punished. It's the people that respond. And, like people are trying to argue over who started it all and everything like that. They point to the Isaiah Stewart shove of Dante 2 plays before. People are pointing, oh, well, Dante screamed F no to Isaiah's shooting a shot. Whatever that had as far as implications on that tussle, there's no reason why Dante and Naz Reid had to react the way that they did. Yeah. Because Ron Holland, quite frankly, made a clean attempt on a jump shot that was just a foul where he got contact on the arm. And then the Minnesota Timberwolves players react the way that they did, and they essentially got rewarded for it. If you think about it, they took the bullet, they so to speak, they took the ejection, and they might take a suspension. But if you look at how this played out, the players that Detroit were missing, who they ended up missing afterwards, the Pistons ended up missing almost half of their roster because of this whole ordeal. They're already out 3 of their best players going into the game. So for them to have that type of impact on the way it was officiated, all because they're trying to step in and get their guy, I'm sorry. There's no other way to say it. I try to keep my cool. It's bullshit. And that's the only term that appropriately describes it. If you are a Minnesota Timberwolves fan, member of the organization, player, anyone that is involved with Minnesota, and you feel proud or you feel happy about that win and how that played out, I don't know what to tell you. You might be too far gone, because that was embarrassing.
Yeah, they didn't.
Around, in my opinion,
they weren't putting in the effort at the beginning. You saw Detroit putting in the effort, and then the guys who give the most effort, especially since Cade's been out, Isaiah Stewart, Ron Holland, Marcus Sasser, those are 3 guys who have been spark plugs for this team. Mini microwaves for them in spurts on defense, on offense, all around. And as soon as they got off the court, it felt like they were holding on a little bit, but you just saw the momentum coming, because when you have Anthony Edwards, when you have Rudy Gobert, when you have literally everyone else on that damn team, you're expected to win, and you're probably going to, because at the end of the day, the NBA is a skill game. When you have more players that can play at a high level, you're probably going to win. And the big thing for me is I don't even think Ron Holland should have gotten ejected. Because what are you going to do when Naz Reid gets in your face? You get in his face. That happens all the time. They break it up. It's over. Dante DiVincenzo goes up to him, puts his hands on him. Ron Holland pushes it off. And then what does Dante do? He goes right in with an elbow to his chin. And then how are you supposed to react to that? Just stand there and, like you mentioned, are you supposed to just let the Timberwolves beat up on your 19-year-old rookie? And that's when everyone comes in. And Ron Holland was getting pummeled on the floor. I can't lie, man. I mean, there was an angle of the fans reaching out, trying to push off the players. I hope they got ejected.
There was blood.
Yeah.
And listen, Dante DiVincenzo, Ron Holland is 19. Which one of those 3 was the one that was acting like the teenager there? Like, which one? Like, which of those 3 were the ones being immature? It wasn't Ron Holland. He was just standing up for himself. He was standing his ground, because Naz Reid came over, like, pointing his finger, yelling over some absolute nonsense. By the way, probably because they were getting their absolute shitters kicked in throughout the entirety of that first half. So, they can make fun of the shimmy. They can talk while they win at the end of the game all that they want. But if Chris Finch and his coaching staff has any pride over that win, they're either lying to themselves or shouldn't be coaches in the league.
And I like Finch. I've liked him a lot.
I do too.
A lot of people thought when he was brought in, it wasn't a legitimate hire because they were so quick to move on from the previous coach. But the big thing is, he's been respectable since he's been there. And I know coaches don't act like that. Well, I don't know personally. I've never talked to him. But, I mean, I know if you are a coach, you're not going to go into your locker room pouring champagne over the guys, glazing them up over something like that. You're going to hand them their asses, because that's not how you play basketball. That's not how you act on the court. That's not how you promote your franchise. And we're Detroit fans talking about that, who deal with a team that is known for being the bad boys. We're dealing with an Isaiah Stewart who has been known to lose his temper. I don't think anybody in the world, well, there's probably people who enjoy it because, yes, fights are exciting. That's why a lot of people watch hockey. That's why my wife went to every MSU hockey game when she went there, because there were fights.
You notice how there's a lot more energy when hockey's not being played at hockey than when there is?
That just shows the state of the sport.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. But with Isaiah Stewart, I think people just think Detroit fans are like barbarians who just want to pummel other teams, because I don't even think Isaiah Stewart wants to do that. You see the look in his eye every time he gets in an altercation. He looks like a deer in the headlights. You can tell he gets out of there. You can tell he wishes he didn't react like that most of the time. And I'll say there's points where if you are a player, like you said, you're going to stand up for your teammates. But I think at the end of the day, nobody wants to see that. And it feels like we got your Detroit treatment.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things where, again, like, physicality should be encouraged. I'm okay if guys get into it or if there's some form of altercation, but when the officials step in and alter the game in the manner in which they did. And by the way, JB actually just spoke a few minutes ago after the game and gave clarity on his ejection. And I think his quote's rather telling as well, because he said there were things said by their assistant coach, by the way, I'm probably the assistant coach who got ejected for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And he said, I'm in the same boat as my guys are in. We are going to defend each other. So when you talk about just when the team that's getting punished here is the one that's standing their ground and not being allowed to be pushed around. That's just the part that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And like you said, like I like Chris Finch. There's actually a lot of respect between Bickerstaff and Chris Finch. Chris Finch said Bickerstaff is his coach of the year vote. It's not even competition. They were together in Houston. There's respect there. I going into this game, I've been a big advocate of Anthony Edwards and have been a big fan of the turnaround and the culture that's been built in that's been built in Minnesota. But to me, tonight was a very revealing game about what that team really is about. Specifically, guys like Anthony Edwards, who was extremely silent all night long. But then after the Pistons are without 7 of their top players, all of a sudden can get going and finally starts chirping and finally starts getting in their face, which again, don't get me wrong. I'm okay with guys talking trash. I'm okay with guys playing with energy. That's not my point here. My point here is when you're essentially hiding behind mommy and daddy or hiding behind the teacher after you get someone in trouble in the classroom. It's pitiful. It's weak. And I know that not a whole lot's going to be done from this. I know there's going to be fallout from this as far as suspensions and things like that goes. Nothing will be able to go back and change the result of this one. But again, to me, I've seen a lot of poorly handled games over the years. That is towards the top of the list. If you're a member of the Pistons, I don't know how you feel any shame about that loss, because you essentially were put in a position where both of your hands are tied behind your back, and you're essentially supposed to go out there and somehow beat a team that still has an all NBA caliber player and a 4-time defensive player of the year and another former all-star, when you're pretty much playing with two-way guys and your 4th or 5th options are now your first option. Like, that was a shell of the Pistons in that second half.
Yeah, and Malik Beasley on fire. We're going to get into him more in a little bit. But last few things I want to talk about with this Detroit-Minnesota fight. If there's a realignment in the league, if we get an expansion team in Las Vegas, Seattle, those are the 2 big names that are constantly brought up. Those are out west. So if you look at an NBA map, there's one team that is easily, well, there's 2 teams probably debatably that could go over east.
2 or 3.
Yeah, there's 3. There's one up north, one in the middle, one lower. You have New Orleans, Memphis, and then Minnesota. Yeah. Minnesota is closer to the Bucks than Cleveland is. So that just shows how close they would be able to fit into that central division. I think some people have said Memphis would make more sense, but look at the cluster up north. I want you all to pull up a map. I'll probably put one on the screen right now, and it's going to look really crappy, but it's going to be there to prove this point. If there is Minnesota in the Central Division in the future, whatever they call it, if they get added, I mean, that's a rivalry brewing. You have 2 potential faces of the league, Anthony Edwards, Cade Cunningham, and 2 pretty gritty teams when it comes down to it.
I would, after tonight, I would welcome seeing that team 4 times a year, just from the standpoint of being able to stick it to that team 4 times a year. Again, I'm trying to keep emotions out of this one. There's a lot, like Minnesota, again, give credit to them and the progress that they've made. They made the Western Conference Finals last year for a reason, yada, yada, yada. That was some bullshit. And sometimes there's really not else to say other than that.
So, Sean, we talked about this a little bit in text. Should we be worried about Cade Cunningham's injury? I know a lot of people have been saying, it's fine, don't worry about it. But me and you and every other Pistons fan has been burned by some sort of Pistons injury in the past, especially with Cade Cunningham. I think we're gonna see his games played high this year. So, what is your intake on that? Do you have any insight?
Yeah, he already reached his season or his career high in games played in the season this year, right before he went out with injury. Just getting a sense from just talking to people at when I went to the when I went to the Pistons Cavs game, and also just hearing from JB before the game, the injury is not nothing. It is like Cade Cunningham is like the injury is real. That is, that calf issue is a legitimate thing. But as I texted you earlier, like if I had to put like a number on it on a scale of 1 to 10, my concern level would be at a 4 or 3, because it's one of those things where it's not nothing. It is definitely not nothing. When you talk about calf injuries, it is something that you have to be, very, very serious about, but you have to monitor very closely, because the calf being connected to the Achilles, and the amount of stress that you can have on that type of injury, it can cause you to compensate as well, with the way that you move and the way that you land, and it can lead to other injuries. It's one of those. It's kind of one of those domino effect injuries, if you will. So for a guy like Cade, and with where the Pistons are at, I think it makes sense for them to play it safe, and and to really just look towards, like the long game here in that sense, right? I think the like one thing to note, and I know people might think this is nothing, but before the Cleveland game, he was like the night before, he was outright ruled out. Like he was not even considered to be playing in that Cleveland game. Whereas in the Minnesota game, he was listed doubtful and then was ruled out before. So, I know that seems like not a whole lot, but that is progress. That is showing that, the Pistons are at least eyeing some form of return over the next couple of games, in my opinion. They've treated it as day to day. They've never put a timeline of him being out for like weeks or anything of that nature. There's no reevaluation period. So to me, that says that this isn't an injury where they anticipate this being season ending, where they don't anticipate him not being able to be back by playoffs at the very least. And, like, especially when the Pistons were playing really well, like, tonight it looked like they were about to be on a verge of a 3-game winning streak before, all the shenanigans that happened in Minnesota. But, they had that really good game against the Pelicans. They have that phenomenal win against Cleveland at home, and it puts them in a position where I think there's a little less urgency to have to rush him back. Obviously you coincide that with the Tobias stuff, him being a last second scratch in the Minnesota game, probably just want to make sure he's really ready too, because it's kind of a similar thing. But whereas this one, it's with Tobias, it's just straight up his Achilles. So it sucks. Obviously, you never want to see guys on the injury report at this time of year, but the truth of the matter is, in any professional sport, no guy's going to be 100% at the end of the season. Everyone has something lingering to some effect. Some guys more than others. A guy like Cade, who's been asked to have one of the highest usage rates in the league, to be one of the league leaders in minutes played, as far as average and total this season, he has a lot in his shoulders, right? So I wouldn't necessarily go out and just fully say, oh, he's injury prone, this is going to be a problem each and every year, because the shin's kind of a one-off thing. That's not going to that's not something that should be returning or should linger throughout his career. And the other injuries were kind of freakish in nature, right? So I think the only way this could truly turn into a real red flag scenario is if he's rushed back all like Kevin Durant in 2019 in the finals, when he came back and tore his Achilles because he wasn't at 100%, right? So I think this is just Detroit playing it safe, realizing that as much as they want to make a run this season, it is not about this season. And I know fans don't want to hear that, but this season was never projected for them to be a playoff season for them. So, I think they're just trying to get their star as healthy as possible before they ask him to do even more come April and May. So,
yeah, and you're talking about the trajectory going from out to doubtful. It's looking like it's on a positive trend there. And I think the biggest thing that I want to know is if this team is going to have the cohesion going right into the playoffs. They seem like a team that's very together. It seems like a top locker room in the league. But when you're talking about playing in late March and getting ready for early April and getting ready for that first round matchup, you need to have minutes together. because that's when you start fine-tuning things. That's when you start getting a game plan for the team you're going to play in the first round. In the first round matchup, it's looking like it's probably going to be 4-5 Pacers-Pistons. I mean, we have 2 more wins than the Bucks, 1 less loss. And if we were going against the Knicks as the 6th seed, I mean, it helped make me feel almost a little bit better because you're going against a Jalen Brunson who's also going to be coming off injury. But Indiana, they've been together. They've been playing like a dominant squad this year, especially in the latter half.
They've been good. Of late,
yes,
they've been good.
Yes. Like, it's definitely been a few weeks. I mean, Tyrese Halliburton had that awful stretch to start. People thought he was washed, didn't make an all-star team. They're a scary matchup for this squad. It feels like they can run, we can run. It's really going to matter who can do what in the half court. And I feel like Indiana, we've seen more success. So this isn't in the show notes, but I kind of want your input now that it's looking like it's going to be more of a Pacers matchup than a Knicks matchup. How do you see that going?
Yeah, the Pacers are the toughest matchup for Detroit of these 3, and I don't think it's particularly close at the moment as far as availability, as far as momentum, as far as, you know, and especially in the playoffs, styles make fights. It's very similar, you know, almost kind of gets like boxing or MMA, where it's like the way that these guys play very much matters, right? And like you said, the Pistons and the Pacers are very similar teams, and they do not like each other. And I think one thing you have to factor in as well is these series are already going to be high intensity. They already are going to be more heated. Now, you throw them against a team that they've already had beef with this season, that they just straight up do not like each other. And you throw them in a 7-game series together where they have to repeatedly play each other and get physical and have that high intensity just only grow. Like, if you think that there's not going to be something like what we saw in Minnesota tonight, like, I think you're just lying to yourself. Like, there's going to be something that happens in that series, right?
Over under 2.5.
What's that?
Over under 2.5.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like it's not going to be just one. I think we all know that. And if we're being honest, the Pacers are a lot better equipped to handle that type of loss than the Pistons are, because they have an Andrew Nembhard, they have a Benedict Mathurin, they have a TJ McConnell. They have, you know, they have a lot of depth at a lot of different positions, whereas Detroit, they're injured. You know, they have guys like Jaden Ivey who they're praying can come back, but if we're being realistic, it's a lot to ask of someone who just broke their leg at the beginning of the year. They have a Cade Cunningham who, you know, I think he'll be fine, if I'm being honest with you. But like you said, you have to at least factor in the fact that he's coming off of a calf injury. And now Isaiah Stewart is only like 2 technical fouls away after tonight from facing a suspension. So that's something that you have to really start, you know, looking at is he going to get suspended for a playoff game? Because the answer is probably going to be yes.
Yeah.
So it's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out. I don't think, you know, I think the Knicks are the most winnable of those 3. Obviously, the Bucks looks more enticing after a, you know, unfortunate blood clot issue for, you know, a Damian Lillard. But the Pacers, you know, that's you know, they just made the Eastern Conference Finals last year themselves, right? And you know, so they know exactly what to expect from that situation. So I think the biggest thing is, no matter what, you just want to see the Pistons have a competitive series. You just want to see them get their first playoff win since 2008. You don't want to see another sweep, even though, you know, I don't think that would taint this season. I certainly think you would have a lot more fans truly feeling bought in and sold that things are actually different because of the fact that they went and broke that streak and got that playoff win.
Yeah. And kind of taking that into account, talking about what a playoff loss even would mean for the team. We talked on your podcast, we talked on here before, I've talked on here before about how the end of the season in this playoffs is kind of like a mini tryout for Trajan Langdon and these players, because the only players he drafted, Bobby Klintman, Ron Holland, he brought in a couple free agents, but all the other players were layovers from the last regime. So a lot of what we're seeing as of recent, what we're going to see is going to make it's going to make a hard decision for what Trajan Langdon has to do this offseason. There's a lot of ways he could go.
I mean, I'll say this: if you're Trajan Langdon, I think two guys you have to be pretty thrilled with the way that they've played are Dennis Schroeder and Marcus Sasser. Schroeder, to be able to come in and run the offense the way that he is able to, his ability to like coordinate things and make life easier for Cade and guys around him. He's just been such a seamless fit ever since coming to Detroit, and I think he's been, something that this team has sorely needed, and I think you've really just seen him come into his own. I mean, he had to pretty much play every single minute in this Minnesota game. He's had his hand over a lot of like Pistons wins of late, particularly that Cleveland game. He played really well in, and then Marcus Sasser, I would just say, if you looked at his season, it's been very inconsistent as far as when he's been able to get playing time, when he's been able to step in. And I think when you talk about just his ability to stay ready and to up his production, and I think the big thing is no longer having to be that third point guard on this team to really focus on scoring the basketball, which is that's his skill set. That's what Marcus Sasser does when he's at his best. So to me, I think that like those are guys that when I think of like, all right, they've had some like really impressive like week last week or so. I think of those two guys in particular. I mean, you could put a lot of guys on those lists on that list though. I mean, you could literally just put an A plus for Malik Beasley for the entire season, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, and if we're talking about Malik Beasley, and my camera cut out, I don't know what's going on with it right now, but I will try to fix that as we keep going. But 98th percentile in three-point attempts, 93rd percentile in three-point percentage. He's been an absolutely phenomenal piece, and I think we need to almost give him the keys to the city. I mean, we're talking about a player who has came in and has done so much for this franchise. So I just don't know how you let him leave. You saw him bring the energy all game tonight. You saw him bring the energy this whole season.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how you can't say he has been the biggest free agent acquisition of anyone from this past free agency, and let alone, I mean, the past 10 years of the Pistons' time.
I mean, he's having the number one 3-point shooting season in the league. Like he's shooting at really high levels as far as volume goes and efficiency goes. Like Anthony Edwards is the number 2 guy in 3-point shooting this year as far as makes. Malik Beasley number 1, and he essentially has turned into prime Klay Thompson this season as far as his 3-point shooting is concerned. And I like you said, just what he's meant to this team, both on and off the court, makes him someone that would be very, very hard to lose, especially if you lose him for nothing. So I think if you're talking about like the number one priority for the Pistons in the open market in free agency, it is simply making sure that guy stays in your building.
Yeah, so talking about the positives from him, who has been a player, and it could be even a young core piece, and it doesn't have to be someone who's done dog shit, not someone who's done awful. Has there been a player that you think is not long for Detroit? And it might be a long shot because a lot of these players have been playing well. They've been playing with energy. They fit what we've been doing. And I don't want to just bash anyone. But is there someone you look at and say, next year that position might be refilled?
Yeah, I think I just when you're looking at player futures, it's interesting, right? Especially, I think you have to look at kind of like the end of the bench. Like if there's guys that I think you look at, okay, where could Detroit potentially, find improvements? I think a guy like a Simone Fontecchio, you've wanted a little bit more consistency from him throughout this season. I think they're going to have some very interesting conversations about what a Jaden Ivey extension looks like. And especially, I think it's an uncomfortable reality that I don't think people really want to talk about is the fact that the Pistons have not only maintained their winning ways without Jaden Ivey, they've almost been better record wise without Jaden Ivey ever since he's gone down. I'm not saying they're a better team without Jaden Ivey. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is if you're a Trajan Langdon, you're looking at, okay, well, what can we do to improve? Like what other players could you put around this, like put around this type, like this type of roster and like these talents. Like I don't think you'd feel like it'd be such a massive loss if you end up losing if you end up losing a Jaden Ivey in a trade, because you've proven to do pretty well without him.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a tough one.
It's interesting because, again, I think a lot of guys have had really good seasons this year. Like I don't know if there's really a whole lot of guys that you go, man, they've just had a bad season for the Pistons.
Yeah.
But it's like if you're talking about like, okay, who are like the true untouchables of this team? It's like, all right, well, it's Cade. I think you feel pretty safe of keeping of like seeing out Ron Holland's like rookie contract. Asar Thompson obviously has been an absolute menace, but then like outside of that, it gets a little tricky as you start making those rankings.
Yeah, and I think the big thing with going back to the Jaden Ivey point a little bit is Trajan Langdon might have some grace if next year he keeps him. It doesn't go well. You then have, I don't want to say a scapegoat, but then you have an escape valve. You have a safety valve you can go to, and you can say, well, if it's not working, let's trade Jaden Ivey. We know what formula at least showed success, and we know how to make that happen. You put shooters around Cade, but if it works, then give that guy a gold medal. Give him a gold watch. Give him the keys to the city, like I mentioned about Malik Beasley. Because if that works, then he's the smartest guy in the room. Because I feel like everyone is saying, you know what? We're seeing what works. Why would you risk that for maybe a setback if something doesn't happen and doesn't work?
Yeah, I think people almost expect by default for the Pistons to go and make this massive trade or cash in this summer. Like, oh, clearly we're going to go get Devin Booker and we're just going to, contend for championships starting next season. But I think there's a real argument to be made, especially when you look at the chemistry and the cohesion that this team has and how young they are, that Detroit could very well keep this team together this summer for the most part, and then at least see it out through the trade deadline. Because if you could be like in Indiana, where you potentially could see like a Pascal Siakam type player get on the market, and you're starting to see your group ascend, or like see some areas that you can like address some holes and find like that right star to put alongside your team that fits that timeline and fills gaps that you truly have on the squad. And again, like what's the rush of breaking up this type of group when they have had, because like we're no longer talking about like, oh, this has been a good turnaround. We are now saying objectively, this is the greatest single season turnaround in NBA history. And it is one of the greatest single season turnarounds in sports history. So I ask you, Leggy, why the would you be so quick to change up so much of that roster?
Yeah, that's true, because if you change it in the offseason, you're going off of what already happened, what happened in the past. If you wait till the deadline, you're changing what you know needs to be changed, because you're not changing ifs and potentiallys and buts. You're changing these are the stats, because the NBA changes so much from offseason to beginning of the year. I mean, a lot less than football, which changes drastically. You're talking about top-tier running backs that are on top of the world, and then they don't get any money. Like J.K. Dobbins is a story. He came back from injury. Not to branch off too far, had a great season with the Chargers. I had him in my Dynasty Football League. He was one of the top running backs in the league. He's still unsigned. Nobody cares because there's so many of them. Stuff changes so quickly, and in the NBA, that happens too. So I've always been on the boat of go get yourself a star. But it's so tough, because if you get one in the offseason, you're going to get one of the first ones that come out. You're going to have to pay a lot of money because everyone's going to want them. So why don't you wait until you can pick and choose between a few? And I always go back and forth on this, because I'm a devil's advocate by heart. So I can give you both points and why I think they make sense. The fanboy in me wants us to go and get a Devin Booker, and heck, it'll happen if it could work, but I doubt it.
Right. So here's the reality, Leggy. Like, how many times have we seen this league? Who can just be available in a snap? that you just would never think would be on the trade market. Like the thing that we see in the NBA that we don't see in the NFL and some of these other sports is the player empowerment, the player mobility, guys all of a sudden being on the market that you never thought would be traded in a million years. We are in a league where Luka freaking Doncic got traded to the Los Angeles Lakers out of blue. Like, more than likely, like, I mean, we saw De'Aaron Fox, who at the beginning of the year, like, Sacramento's like, oh no, he's going to be a king for life. We want him Sacramento for life. Where our priority is getting him extended. We want him to be a king for life. Not even 6 months later, the guy's a San Antonio Spur buying a home in Texas, right? So when you talk about what, like, you know, finding that star in this league, when they become so readily available, what's the rush? And the other thing as well is your assets could have dramatically different value by that point. If a Ron Holland takes a year 2 leap, he could suddenly be a lot more valuable than he would be this summer. A guy like an Asar Thompson, if he develops a 3-point shot, are you telling me that that's not someone that would be, you know, like, very appealing to other teams? You might not have to give up as much in the future if your players do grow and get better and you know, show those promising signs. So to me, like, I again, like, I think another team you look at as well is, I think the Knicks are should feel some buyer's remorse for, you know, the trades that they made. Not that they didn't go out and get great players. They got solid players, but how much they gave up so quickly for a team that probably just isn't even good enough to get to an Eastern Conference Finals when healthy. Like Detroit doesn't have Oklahoma City or Utah or Houston or Brooklyn. Like, they don't have those assets in the cupboard. They don't have pretty much anything in the cupboard. So whatever trade you go and make, that is your one move in the Cade Cunningham era. Like, especially over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
So you damn better make sure it is the right move.
Yeah, because if it doesn't work, you don't just lose that player's value. You lose Cade Cunningham's value. You lose every ancillary piece's value. Because if it doesn't work around a player like Cade Cunningham, how will it work anywhere else? That's what a lot of people will say. So then value will go down. We'll see a Zach LaVine effect for some of these contracts. Not by that, because Zach LaVine's contract is horrendous, by the way. But that's a good point. It's something where I go back and forth on. There's good points on both sides, but I like to err on the side of, you know, you got one move. So, Sean, last thing I want to get to, I want to get your oh shit moment in media, because I feel like people have those, and I want to get your take. That was because people like me who I'm a fan of the NBA, I cover quote the Pistons. I have no inside info. I have nothing like that. This is for the casuals. What is something that made you say oh shit that maybe some other people have not even thought of?
Yeah, I just, over the last couple of years, I just think of some of the things I've been able to see up close and personal in my first 2 seasons, and just a couple of things that come off the top of my head was, one day I was covering a Pistons Bucks game in Detroit, and I was at the you can go to the pregame press conference for the, you know, normally the home team, like Detroit, theirs is about 5:15, and then 5:30 is when the away team's pregame presser starts. So I was front row for Milwaukee's pregame press conference for Adrian Griffin as he was going over, you know, his game plan and all of those things. Not even 24 hours later, Adrian Wojnarowski tweets, Adrian Griffin is no longer the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks. Another thing I think of as well is one of the players that I got to interview the most at the beginning of my media tenure, and, you know, and especially, like, you know, going to, like, the NBA, you know, especially your first year, it's kind of, you kind of have to earn your way up. You're not necessarily, you know, like first in line to ask as many questions. You're really there to learn your first year, right? So if you want to get that practice in, you go to the G League. And a player that I interviewed probably the most in my first couple of months was a guy that goes by the name of Jonte Porter.
Oh, that's what I was guessing.
And then a couple of months later, it comes out that he has this whole betting scandal and all of those things. And to like it's one thing when you read about it on someone that you haven't interacted with on any level. It's a whole other thing when you've seen that person, you've talked to them, and like I listen, man, I did not think like if you were to go like, hey, which player in the G League is doing this, he would not have been my guess. Like
Dude,
he
man.
seemed like he had a good head on his shoulders. He was a good player. Like when he got that spot in Toronto, like he was like, oh, he earned that two-way opportunity to go play with the Raptors and to go get some minutes in the league. Like he could be a promising, like kind of like Trey Lyles type, like backup big. And then all of a sudden all that happens.
That's
And
brutal.
mm-hmm,
That must hurt.
yeah. And so, like there's like the other thing I think of as well is the post game press conference after the Washington loss at home that made you realize that losing streak was really going to be a while. And it's one thing to see those angry press conferences on television. It's another thing to be in the room when when the head coach is going on a passionate rant and is very angry about how things have transpired. You get a guess of what the vibes are like in the locker room after those types of losses. You get a very good sense of what that vibe is just being right down the hall from the locker room. And so, to me it's almost a holy shit moment in itself that this season has happened and the turnaround in itself has happened. It is, like both seasons feel completely different and like contrasting to themselves in that light. And so I know that's probably I hope that answers your question well, because there's a lot of different things too of like when you're just walking in the back and all of a sudden you pass, a player, like it's like, oh, that's Jason Tatum, or oh, that's Giannis Antetokounmpo, or oh, that's Ime Udoka over there. It's like you just have to get used to walking by people that you see on television all the time. But it's like at the end of the day, and I know that this just sounds like corny, but like the truth is they are just people. Like, you know what I mean? Like they are just human beings, and that's the biggest thing you have to remind yourself is like, all right, well they're people that are going to work, that are doing their job, that are playing they're playing this game. And when you're there in that role, you're there just to help tell that story and distribute that information. And it is not about you in the slightest. And so I'm just honored to be in that position and to be able to do so. And, I feel like I've been able to really grow and learn a lot over these last couple of years, especially this season. I feel like I can see that growth in some of those things. But yeah, man, it is it can be a very surreal a circumstance when you're in some of those rooms and all the things happen. Okay, I can't believe I didn't say this.
Oh man.
I was covering the Pistons Mavericks game the day before the Luka trade. I saw Mike Curtis, who covered the Pistons and covers the Mavericks now. Like, he and I were chopping it up and everything seemed great. And you get no sense that anything like that is coming out of that Dallas camp. Everyone's talking about, oh, well, it'll be interesting to see when Luka comes back and all of those things. 24 hours later, the Shams tweet that broke the internet goes out, and everything completely flips on a dime.
Yeah, I feel bad I don't feel bad because they have great jobs. But Mike Curtis goes to Dallas, leaves Detroit after a horrendous season, now has to deal with where they are. James Edwards, you're in New York, so I can't critique that. But you have all of the things that are happening. It's not the team that a lot of people expected them to be. Maybe they should have stayed in Detroit. We'd still get some amazing coverage. I don't know.
I mean, I'll tell you this. When you're in that position, you really don't take too much stock into the team's results. Like a guy like an Omari Sankofa, he's getting ready for pretty much his first playoff series. It definitely his first playoff series in Detroit. And he was like, man, I had in my head that this just wasn't going to happen.
Oh man,
when you're in that position, you just kind of, it's like, all right, well, it is what it is. It's like, and he's someone that's from Detroit. He's someone that grew up a Pistons fan. Like, you kind of have to get to, because if you do let that affect yourself, that could be a very, very grueling job when you let those losses take a toll on you. So, it's, obviously, I think those guys will be okay, because ultimately they still have one of the coolest jobs
exactly
on the face of the planet. But at the same time, it is one of those things where, it is like, oh man, like that Detroit situation is suddenly a lot different than when I left it. And so it's an interesting thought at the very least.
Yeah. But Sean, thank you for coming on. I mean, we witnessed a horrendous game. There was a lot of fire at the beginning of this episode. But I want to make sure that the people check out what you're doing. So just to remind people, or for people who have not watched this content before, what do you do? What do you post? When do you post it? Where do you post it? Where can they find you?
I appreciate you, man. Always a pleasure coming on. You can find my work primarily on From Half Court on YouTube, is where the podcast goes down at least once a week. I go on with my guy Troy. You come on quite a lot as well, and some other guests and people throughout the league. So you can find that on YouTube at From Half Court. You can also find my day-to-day coverage at Sean Half Court on Twitter. I go to Pistons games, cover some throughout the year, post any of those interactions, media availability, all that stuff there, as well as latest news, updates, thoughts, takes throughout the game. So be sure you give a follow for that if you're interested. But yeah, man, thanks again for having me on. Excited to see how this season plays out, and looking forward to coming back on here real soon.
Yeah, the playoffs are coming up. I mean, this is
2 weeks away, man.
This is the most exciting time for Pistons fans. I mean, this is the crown jewel of my fandom. It's the last piece of my Thanos ring. So I'm excited to get back on. Sean, I want you to come on around the playoffs time and kind of see what we're talking about, what we're dealing with, what's the matchup, what we're looking at. Yeah. Maybe there's another Isaiah Stewart fight. Maybe he's ejected by then. I don't know.
I mean, I would say, knowing an Isaiah Stewart, he is not afraid for any of that smoke. So I would imagine that he's not exactly a Boy Scout in that regard. So yeah. I would not be surprised. How about that?
But thanks again, Sean. We'll be back soon with more content. We're going to be on with Brennan Sims, blog writer, for a bunch of different stuff. He'll be on, I think, tomorrow, maybe the next day. There's a game tomorrow, right?
I thought their next game was Wednesday.
Well, it's Wednesday. That's what it
Thunder.
Yep, that's when that will be. So make sure you tune in for that one. We'll talk to you later. See ya.